Hello and welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers podcast. Tonight we are going to talk about red flags for testers. I'm joined by two of the usual crew and a special guest. First, Chris.
Hello, hello.
David.
Hiya.
And Steve.
Hello there.
And Steve is going to give us the sponsor's message.
Indeed. Saffron QA continue to be our sponsor, and they are also here to support the testing community. Therefore, should any of our listeners be in the market for a new job in testing or hiring new talent for your team, please reach out to Ben. He can be contacted via email at ben@saffronqa.co.uk.
Thank you, Steve. And over to Mr. Bounce for tonight, David.
Today, I'm going to throw out the question there. Have you ever been told you look like someone famous? Or have you thought that you look like someone famous? And if so, who was it? And how old were you when you were told that?
It's a tricky one, that one. I once got shortlisted when I was an extra in a television show to be the body double for a stunt involving a football on a red carpet for Callum Best, the son of George Best. And that, my friends, is the closest I ever got to looking like someone. I was told I was too tall. So there we go. I actually think he's taller than me. So I don't know what they're talking about. But, you know, I got to meet George Best in real life. So that was kind of cool.
Excellent.
He wasn't very well.
I've got two that I've been told I look like, and I've never seen the similarities with either of them. One was literally first day of university. I walked into the halls of residence and someone went, "It's Dave Gorman." For those who don't know Dave Gorman, he's a comedian that's famous for Google Wax, where he did a book on Google Wax.
I don't see it apart from the check shirts, but maybe you're always with PowerPoint.
Yeah, possibly. And the other one, which my mum and others have said, and when I was working for a previous company, the whole offshore team thought it as well. Prince William. Again, can't see it. Never seen it. But I had a whole team, people call me William because they believed I looked like Prince William. They're the two that I've had.
Mine's not that exciting. Somebody did say I look once like Ian Beale out of EastEnders. Is it Adam Wood? Yeah, I can't remember his name, but yeah, I can't remember. Probably in my late 20s by then.
I've got two as well. So in my 20s, I had very curly hair. So people thought I looked like Pete Sampras. And then more recently, I've been compared to Louis Theroux, which I don't know if that's a compliment or not. But anyway, I'll see how that goes.
I quite like to see an awkward documentary hosted by you, David.
Well, you just need to listen to one of these podcasts. It's almost the same, isn't it? Excellent. Let's get on to the topic, red flags for testers. Chris, do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, I'm to blame for this topic, so I might as well help us kick it off. Look, I've been thinking there's a lot of things as testers that we do, looking around, analysing the world. We are quite good at catastrophizing, looking for risks and bad things. And we're not just talking about code, bad practices, bad procedures. Oh my goodness, who set that Jira instance up? But there's a whole wealth of these things, culture, people. And I wondered if we had some stories that we could sort of share and then talk about, and maybe some tips for identifying these things and maybe how to deal with those things as we sort of just go along. If everyone's happy to join me on this little red flag ride.
Where do we start?
I'm happy to start. My first red flag was, I may have shared this before, not introduce people to your company, basically. So I'd started at a company just about a couple of weeks before, and so I was just finding my feet. And I found just moments before a stand-up, a bug. And because I didn't have any context, I knew that it wasn't right, but I didn't know what had caused it or anything else. So I went to the stand-up and admittedly just said, I found this bug. I know nothing else. It's my priority to find it out. And the PM stood there and went, well, we're going to wait here until you tell us what the problem is. And I said, I can't. We'll be standing here all day because I don't know what the problem is. And since I don't know, I can't give you an answer. But I will, when I find out, you will be the first person to know. No, we will stand here for the whole day until you tell me. I said, well, you can stand here as long as you want. I need to go back to my desk to find out what the answer is because I don't know. there are two things. So firstly, don't intimidate new people, but also be wary of PMs trying to show their authority and actually call them out on it and show them up.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because you talk about sort of going into a new job. It takes courage to actually speak up. And I think a red flag for me is the reaction you get from other people if you do happen to speak out, because then you kind of find out whether that's a good fit or not. And you think, is that the kind of place that I want to be in? Am I going to be supported? So you can get loads of red flags from just how people treat you in the first few weeks. And then it kind of sets the scene for how you think things are actually going to work out or not for you in that organization. For me, I guess one of the red flags that I think I found actually, even before starting the company, is just trying to look out for things in interviews and the kind of things that people ask you or tell you that they might want you to do. I had one job that I went for where they basically said they needed someone to come in and lead a testing team. If you come in, right, you're going to be responsible for this, this, and this. And it basically sounded like they were just going to dump a whole heap of stuff on me. And it wasn't just one red flag in my head. There were loads because I was thinking, whoa, I really don't fancy that. And I went back and they'd made me an offer and I said no. And they actually found my work phone number and called me up and said, why did you turn the job down? And I said, where did you get my number from? And that was another red flag. It's like, you're stalking me. Just don't do it, please. The subtle red flags and there's the absolute smack in the face ones. I'm glad I didn't go for that one, to be fair.
I was going to say interviews are an interesting one. I think that when you are interviewed, one red flag for me that I've taken on board and won't happen again is I was taken into an office space in the reception and interviewed by one person and then disappeared and had to make a decision on that company based on that interaction with that one person. And I wouldn't do that again. I would want to see more people interact with more people. And especially if I was at the site, actually have a tour around or see some of the working environment or the people working. That's totally a red flag.
Yeah, I have a similar one as far as interview process. And this is from an experience I had as well, where I applied for a role and I basically had an informal chat with the head of at that point. And after about 20 minutes of conversation, they basically went, yeah, the job's yours as far as I'm concerned. Don't need to do any more interviewing. And I'm like, but hang on a minute. I've not even seen the office. I've not met anybody. Can I at least come to the office? And they were like, yeah, we can organise a visit. You come into the office and we can have a chat. I can show you around. We can have a little interview. And basically the interview was a very informal chat there and then. They basically already decided they want to give me, but they hadn't interviewed anybody else for the role. And I realised I hadn't found out anything about the role. Stupidly, because I was jumping out of one role into another, I took the role on and it was probably the worst year of my life as far as a job concerned. But yeah, it was a red flag I should have picked up on earlier on. And the other red flag I was going to mention, going back to your story, David, about the PMs and I had the story again. I think I've mentioned this before, where starting a new job, starting a new project, and the PM's very much like, oh, we don't need testing anywhere near the project at this point. We'll come and get you when we need them towards the end of the project. We haven't got the funds to support testing at this point. And again, big red flag that I then had to push very hard against to try and change.
Those first impressions, or those in inverted commas, strong personalities that we sometimes come across, they can really tarnish what could potentially otherwise be a really good place to work. I mentioned when talking about this topic before we started recording about how I had a PM that had a certain penchant for wanting to address every single issue raised in a stand-up. And one time it was 3 hours long and he wouldn't let anybody leave, even if the conversation had nothing to do with them. He was literally reducing our effectiveness and costing the company money just as like some sort of a strange power play. Thankfully, one of the more vocal members of the team shut him down eventually. But when you're new or you're feeling a bit junior or you don't quite feel settled and comfortable, knowing whether you should even speak up is quite a tricky thing, isn't it? Because is this a safe space for me to be able to do that? I've had it before when I felt very confident at the beginning speaking up, and you soon discover you don't do that here. Sort of like just carrying on from that sort of thing. A big red flag for me is when maybe I've been in a company for a while and I've discovered something new that I wasn't aware of when I started, and I'll have an informal chat with someone who's been there a little bit longer and they just go, Yeah. It's always been like that here. Sort of a shrug of the shoulders. It is what it is. It's just the way it's going to do. It's not going to change. Oof. That's not good.
That is a red flag, isn't it? It's like how they prepared to learn. You could talk of interviews. We were talking about being interviewed, but actually interviewing testers as well. There's certain red flags you can pick up from people. Some are quite subtle, and you have to really listen and carefully between the lines, and others. And I had somebody who came for a testing job. I was really new to interviewing, and I'd only just been kind of thrown into managing a team. They've made a test manager redundant, and I was a test lead. And it's like, okay, you're now looking after the test team. And okay, and we need a tester. Right. I've never interviewed before. Yeah, don't worry, you'll be fine. So there I'm looking at CVs, and I get someone in and I start asking questions and realize that actually the person who put few things on the CV around testing, never tested anything in their life at all. And I thought, I've really made a right mess up here. And I remember just turning around and going, I'm not really sure that you've actually tested or that this is the right thing for you. I was thinking, I should have red flagged that. And I just had no idea what I was doing. You have to learn from your experiences as to what things you need to kind of mentally store up and go, if I see that again, I'm definitely going to know that that's something that's wrong. But often you just don't know until it's too late.
I think it's always a challenge with interviewing, because you're right. There's always the candidates that you think, wow, you've either clearly lied on your CV and you've got no experience when you mention it. But it's also, I think, the testing world in itself, because of the amount of bubbles there is within the testing world, but there's people that are very advanced looking at exploratory testing or in the testing in DevOps, and you've got the other end of the spectrum, which is still very waterfall testers that are working at the end of cycles and et cetera, and still very manually scripted, etc. It's sometimes difficult to get what you want in that interview process without stumbling across, oh, wow, you're working in that context. Oh, that's a red flag. We're over here. You're over there. So, yeah, I've certainly experienced that in interview processes as well. I've also experienced it where I've made the decision to take someone on because it was an internal transfer and we needed to do a favor for the other manager and move them across, and they wanted to come into testing, and moved them across into testing. And actually, even with support, they were not able to grasp the basic concepts. And then it's like, well, the red flag was I was doing this as a favor to start with. I shouldn't have really been pushed into that situation of moving someone across that wasn't really what I needed in the team. So yeah, I think the more we talk, it's obvious there's red flags everywhere.
We should probably move on from interviews though, because otherwise we'll just get stuck.
One more thing about interviews.
Last one and no more, otherwise it's a red flag.
One thing you can do to alleviate your expectation of red flags in the company before you join them is actually ask the similar question if you've got a panel or seeing different people. The same question, for example, what are the best and worst things about working for this company, and see it's a consistency or whether people change their answers as to what's good or what's bad within the company. Because actually, if there's a consistency, then actually there's a limited number of problems or good things. But then if there are so many things, you then can go, oh, all right, okay, there are lots of issues here.
You've inspired me for a follow-on on interviews, and I've gone against my own rules.
Oh, red flag.
Red flags, everybody. So one of my favorite questions to ask in an interview when I'm being interviewed, they give you a forum to ask a question. You should, where you can, if you're alive and alert enough, ask questions about the things. One that I like to ask is, what excites you about working at this place? Why do you come to work every day? Why are you excited about this company? Because if I'm interviewing the company, right, when in that situation, and if they can't answer that or they're not interested, I probably don't want to work there.
And also, you can tell a lot by the pause before they answer.
Yeah, this is them going, oh goodness. But we should move on from interviews, otherwise it'll just be another interview.
Yeah, so I'm going to move on. So one thing that is quite interesting is the fact that sometimes people can say things out of turn. So when you're talking to people, especially important as a manager, that actually you need to be careful what you actually say, because you can change the people's perceptions in an instant by saying the wrong thing or saying things in the wrong way. And so that can be a red flag and can really jeopardize all the good work you've done by saying the wrong thing.
So much culture. I'm going to just come back to something that I said in my intro, because it gets on my wick like nothing else. a terrifically badly set up Jira or other task management solution, those things like this, that's one of your introductions to a company's ways of working, their workflows, their Kanban boards, the way tickets of any descriptions, be them bugs, features, stories, whatever, how those things are written. They give you like an insight into how communication may or may not be operating. And also, as a tester, where they view testing and many other things. And the next red flag that comes along with that is if you go, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could maybe make something that works better for how we want to work going forwards? Can we make some changes? And they go, oh, no, we've outsourced that to somebody.
If that's a red flag, what would you say the color of the flag would be if you get there and the only thing Jira is used for is defect management? Oh, we don't need to manage the other parts of it.
Well, now Jira was originally created to be a defect manager.
It was, absolutely.
So, if they just use it for that, if they had a wall with post-it notes that carried their work and they worked in an agile, transparent way, and they had some means for people to be able to be on the same page and all those things, then sure, I don't need Jira to tell me all of my work in the fullest of detail. But when we are working in a remote or an asynchronous space, I think we need to have something that works for us. And the more it is able to be a tool that bends to our needs rather than us bending to a tool's needs, then that's fine. I don't really believe a one-size-fits-all approaches with these things. So when they say everybody must follow this particular model, this particular status, because listeners, context is king, and everybody is different.
I think going back a few years now, before Jira became the sort of the all-encompassing tool it was, we were using Bugzilla for our defect management. And of course, every team, even within the same engineering department, used it differently as far as what details they put in the bug reports and stuff. And one of my tasks as a junior graduate tester was, I'll just go through all the defects. And you'll learn about the system by going through the defects. And some of these defects were 10, 15 years old, and there'd never been any kind of bug scrub. So there was literally like 7,500 defects. And they're like, you'll get a good picture of the systems and the quality of the systems.
Graveyards, there's a red flag.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was getting to. And as part of that, I set up a series of bug scrubs. Didn't know what a bug scrub was at that point, but I read something somewhere about this defect scrub, bug scrub process. And we set up a series of meetings, an hour a day. We went through 20 defects and we worked out whether we wanted to keep them all. And that was about 2 months worth of effort on a daily basis going through these defects. And even then, you close bugs down that are 10 years old and somebody would shout, going, oh no, we need to fix that. It's been open for 10 years. Why has it not been fixed if it's important? And there's just these red flags everywhere. Anyone else experience that kind of thing?
I was just going to ask Chris a follow-up, so if that's all right, just from what you said. You talked about like Jira boards and stuff. What about, would this be a red flag if an organization said, yeah, we're agile, but the only agile thing was a Jira board?
I said this today to somebody, I said, Jira can be an all right tool, but it markets itself as an agile tool. And I gotta tell you, I'm suspicious when it comes to that, because it's literally a tool that can force teams to not work in their own way, to not collaborate. There are literally plugins on Jira that allow people to never actually communicate with the rest of their teams, to plan their every nth degree, to do retrospectives where people don't actually ever interact and talk about things. They just post things up on there. It can be a dreadful, dreadful tool. And it's all the worse because it can be a great tool that can do really great things. But if somebody said that they're agile because they have Jira, I'd probably mute my microphone, excuse myself for a minute, and go and scream up the top of a hill somewhere. And then I'd come back and go, all right, well, that's a starting point. I know where you're at. If you've got an appetite to improve, we can still work with each other. If you don't, sayonara.
It's a red flag if you've got people who won't actually speak to other people and rely on using Teams messages. I was talking to someone not so long ago, but basically just said somebody 3 desks away messaged him, and he basically just got up and said, I'm over here. Why don't you just come and talk to me? Which is a fair point. And that is a red flag if people don't want to actually speak.
Yeah, that happens all the time in companies. I think people, especially now, post-COVID, people rely on messaging rather than actually ringing people or going to their desks and stuff.
I think worse.
There's a caveat with it though, isn't there? Because sometimes like somebody might be actually in flow and like disrupting them would be a bad thing. But that's when you know your people.
Well, there's two things. The other thing there is if it's a free flow hot desking type scenario now where you don't know where you're sitting and you don't know who you're sat next to, etc., etc., they may not know the other person's 3 desks away. They might have not seen them at the corner of their eye, etc., etc. So, but that, yeah.
So free flow hot desking is kind of a red flag for me, to be honest with you. Like, I've got a bad back. I need a chair that supports me. I'm left-handed and have a left-handed ergonomic mouse. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that the whole sort of is to monitor the right height for me. All those pieces that can be quite difficult to feel at home at a desk where I need to be feeling as comfortable as I can be if I have to be doing that flow work. Now, if I don't have to do that flow work and I'm just bouncing back and forth to meetings, hello, red flag, then do you know what I mean? Like your work environment needs to be somewhere you're comfortable and you're not literally injuring yourself by staying put in those places. And you can't cater for everybody. I don't know. I'm not a fan. You might have noticed.
Companies should try to accommodate people, and yeah, it's a red flag if they don't show that they care enough to give you the workstations and everything else that you need.
I guess it depends as well. If they're saving a desk for you, but you're only in the office 1 day a week or 1 day a month, whatever it is, then
well, yeah,
it's a lot of effort for.
Well, here's the next red flag. Then we're doing hybrid working. I've come all the way into the office. What are we doing? Zoom.
Yeah, but there might be that one person that's not in the office that needs to be on the meeting.
My friend, I could have been that one person at home.
Anyway, going back to the communication thing of talking to teams. So we're jumping about all over places tonight. It's great. A red flag for me is when communication is done through the defect. So rather than actually either emailing or picking up the phone or actually going and talking to someone, communication is just the developer puts a response to the defect in there, and then the tester goes back with this, and 3 people get.
My first 4 years in development.
Red flag for me.
We were in a different building. We had different break times to the studio. We weren't allowed to communicate. We had no other means apart from email or the bug tracker. I didn't know if I was to do that now. Obviously,
you weren't allowed to communicate. Sorry, red flag.
Hey, we didn't have internet access. We didn't have a phone. So we had literally the email and the bug tracker, and that was it. Treat your staff like children; they're going to act like children. We kind of acted like children, so those things happen.
You would hope the industry's moved on a bit since then.
Oh, I know it has, and that's a really, really good thing. But I do think that a lot of these pieces only happen because people talked about it and came up with solutions and different things. Like the concept was always the pre-link when there was kind of like a Microsoft Messenger type desktop app. People were just being stupid on it, messing about. But actually today there's GIFs and memes and channels for all manner of stuff, and yet people are still able to deliver their work. Being professional doesn't mean not being human. That's something that you don't really get to lift the curtain on until you actually start working somewhere. Talking about communication, however we do it, that's really important to uncover like how the company operates. Some people say like the minute a company says they're like a family, that's a red flag for them. There's a lot of baggage that comes with those things, right? And, you know, it would be an occasional WhatsApp chat every couple of weeks to make sure everyone's alive, but it wouldn't be very productive, would it? but it is true. You can lift the lid on a lot of these pieces in companies. But what about we talked about Jira and bug tracking, but what about like any other tools, or like if you look at code, they got code smells or the way testing is done or whatever.
Yeah, so I was gonna jump into tools, and I think one red flag for me is when it's already decided what tool you're going to use for automation before you've actually decided what the system and how the architecture is going to set up. You get there, we're going to use Selenium for our automation. You're like, hang on a minute, you've not even looked at the system. Or you get these AI low code, no code solution that they're like, we can definitely solve all your problems. And someone's bought in by the magic, gets a trial for the tool and goes, okay, let's try and use this. And then you go, doesn't fit, doesn't work for us, hasn't got the right responses, doesn't need the, we can't plug it into our estate. So sorry, it's not going to work. And but I've invested all this time in getting this tool in and speaking to the vendors, and sorry, doesn't work for us. So it's that the red flag is really when the tool is selected before the solution is decided.
or even if the problem is understood.
Yeah, even better.
Yeah, yeah. There are the conversations you have with people who say, "Yeah, we can solve your problem, whether it's tooling, whether it's people." It's like, "Oh, we'd really like to help you solve this problem." But you think, well, actually, how do you know what problem we've got in order to solve it? That's a red flag because you've not actually spoken to me before. So how do you know what problems I've got? That kind of is a weird way of doing it. It's like, well, how about offering to assess whether we do have a problem or speak to us first before telling us you can solve a problem you don't know we have?
Yeah, I agree, and I think we have touched on this in one of our toxic episodes we talked about previously. Not toxic episodes, episodes where we talked about toxic issues. I had an example today where someone sent me a message saying, "Hey, EasyJet sounds cool. Let me solve your outsourcing problem." And I was like, "Hang on a minute. You don't know anything about EasyJet. You're based in the States. You sent me an email, cold email that's literally like, I'm going to solve all your problems, and you don't know anything about it." Just, I know that's a marketing approach and it's a different area, but again, big red flag for me is people trying to solve our problems when they don't know anything about us.
How do we address these things? Because we've talked about a lot of things and we've complained about things, but are there actually like ways that we can actually deal with these red flag situations? Because it's not always humanly possible in the face of a red flag for us to just walk away. We have to sometimes be there and deal with those things. Maybe we're responsible for people, responsible for paying bills or whatever. And how can we actually address these things? How can we give feedback in a way that isn't going to get met with another red flag-esque response?
I'm going to quote that it depends on the context and who is responsible for the actual red flag. And every situation is very different. And sometimes it takes a bit of time to recognize those red flags. We've talked about interviews. Sometimes you take jobs. Simon's already admitted that he took a job by mistake. You can get out of it. You can go and find another job. You can also, like I did, stand up to them, be confident and going, I can't give you what you're asking for. You're asking the impossible, and sort of stand up. And also we can be responsible for ourselves. We can try our best not to trigger red flags in other people and sort of expect the consequences. Or we'll also listen. If people do flag up red flags with us, then listen to what they're actually saying and take note and then act on those.
There are ways you can, like you say, David, there's ways you can combat it. I think sometimes it's also building that dialogue within the company as well, that actually talking about red flags as being red flags is actually an okay thing to do. If it's genuinely a problem for, I don't know, testing or something, that doesn't work for us. That's a red flag for us. We can't work with that. We need to do this instead. And start that language of pushing back on stuff in a way that's not confrontational, but almost sort of has a, come on, we can do better than that. It does start to shift things in a progressive way. But if you can start to make that conversation an easy conversation to push on, and start small within a smaller environment, and then you can start to build those bridges in wider areas as well.
It's helpful if you've got people that will listen and take on board things that you flag.
Yeah,
it's I've just had an example of doing just that and reading through something and saying, well, this is a red flag for us for testing. This is something that we wouldn't accept or would make us say, hang on a minute, we need to stop and reassess it. And it was actually taken very seriously, the feedback that we gave. You don't have to just accept things. And if you build up that dialogue, as Simon's saying, people then start to see, you're raising good things. And then it sort of just builds momentum, because next time somebody might ask you, do you see a problem with this? And then they'll expect you to be feeding back. I suppose the first time you do it, it might be, oh, we've never had that before. But then they might get used to sending those red flags and going, this is what we can't live with, but this is what we can. And giving an alternative and giving them options.
It is a tough one, and I don't think there is a real solution. I know a lot of the things we've spoken about are red flags for us, but maybe aren't sort of life and death things. But when people do talk about sort of injustices, and if you don't speak up, then you're kind of complicit in the whole problem. I think we, especially if we are privileged to be in a leadership position and we have a bit of a voice, I think we have a bit of a responsibility to call things out. I know we spoke about this in the toxicity episodes. I don't want to sort of beat the hammer, but I mean, being humble in those things, maybe there are things that we've done and we do that could be red flags for other folks, right? I think it's important to sort of have that culture be normal that we actually talk about what is a red flag for people and to learn from those things. Giving feedback is tough sometimes, especially if it's something that will be likely perceived to be negative by the recipient. It's not an easy job to do. And while we've mentioned this before, we would always try and put a positive spin on feedback, because you start a conversation negatively, you're going to find it very hard to come back from that negative place. It's rough because you know, I need to vent when I see bad things, but you need to find the right people to be venting at about things and show that willing to improve things. And it's a feedback thing, it's a delivery thing. I used to just shrug. I used to be one of those people that's the red flag for me, and just shrugged. Well, that's just how it's always been, not realizing, because I'd never seen it modeled for me, that you can make a difference. Maybe, but you got your mental health to manage, other people's mental health, perhaps. It's not simple, but I would just think in all those situations that I've had in the past, if I hadn't at least said something, I would have regretted it. And in situations where I hadn't said something, I would have regretted it. And maybe it wasn't life or death. Maybe it was just that the cheer instance was rubbish and I was annoyed every time I used it. But that's still annoying every time I use that tool. That's still a bad thing that could be improved. And it's kind of silly that we're not trying to make our processes, our procedures, and our tools better, let alone our culture.
Yeah, I like what you said there about sort of listening to people who raise red flags. Because I think going back to David, your one of your early comments about sort of standing up to someone and then one person in the team supporting you, how would you have felt if they hadn't actually done that? But we can be in those positions to actually maybe ask people, what's your red flag with this? And actually ask, maybe that's a way to kind of tease those out and then work out, okay, so how do we get around it? And then encourage people to speak up a bit.
Is this a time when we might be thinking, let's draw this conversation to a close? We could talk about red flags forever. We could just rant and rant.
It's now time for the checker flag, though, right?
Oh, you racing wizard. Thank you, Steve, for joining us. Thanks, as always, to David and Simon, and to our good friend Ben at Saffron QA for all of your good stuff. We hope this encourages you to talk about red flags with people. Look at identify those sorts of things. And look for that friction in the workplace and how we can improve things. We want to make things better in the workplace, make things better for ourselves and our tools. We hope this sort of maybe just sort of triggers some thoughts and conversations along those lines where you are. We would also love your feedback, positive or negative. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Some of us have sort of got lost on Mastodon, but we're trying. You can also find us at testingpeers.com. You can email us, contactus@testingpeers.com. We have a Patreon, believe it or not. You can find us there, and we'll have all the deets and everything you need in the show notes. But thank you for listening to us once again. Somehow 3 years, we're still going. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.